Good evening, everyone, and thanks for joining us. And for the folks in the room, thank you for braving the heat. We know it's not always easy to physically come to events downtown when the weather is not cooperating and the road situation isn't cooperating. So we really appreciate you being here, and of course we appreciate everyone joining us remotely as well. We have an exhibit in our community gallery up through August 15th, which is about America's Bicentennial in Douglas County. Andrew Stockman, the curator of exhibitions, and director Steve Novak, who's in the corner of the room right now. They wanted this exhibit to not only evoke nostalgia in some viewers who are old enough, but also be thought-provoking. And the prompts, which are featured throughout the exhibit, and it really is remarkable how much they were able to fit into that small community gallery space. The prompts really encourage viewers to think about connections between 1976 and 2026 and how we commemorate things and the choices we make when we commemorate events. So in that spirit, Dr. Karl Brooks, a professor in the School of Public Affairs at the University of Kansas, will speak today about how the Bicentennial came about and how it differed from other celebrations. And afterward, we'll invite everyone viewing, whether remotely or in the room, to share some questions they might have and share their own memories of the Bicentennial. Although looking around the room, I don't see anyone who could have been old enough to remember the Bicentennial, so that might be a little difficult. So with that, please join me in welcoming Dr. Karl Brooks.
Well, thanks everybody for coming out this evening, and thanks to those online. It's definitely cooler where you are online than it must be out on Mass Street in Lawrence. It's an honor for me to be part of the Watkins Museum commemoration of America's 250th Declaration of Independence anniversary. It's a huge honor for me. I'm delighted to do it, delighted to see so many good friends here. And what I thought I would try to do is share with you a little bit of context so that the USA 250 events that are ongoing right now here in 2026 might show you the connections, but especially the differences between 1976 and 2026. So this is going to be one of those classic compare and contrast presentations. And I want to emphasize the contrast because I think you'll see pretty quickly that what is happening in our country right now is quite different from what happened in our country in the bicentennial years 1975 and 1976. It's why I chose as a starting line probably the greatest opening line in literature, Charles Dickens' Tale of Two Cities. It was the best of times, it was the worst of times. Well, twice in the past 50 years, our two big American anniversaries have felt like that. Both came during what folks felt like was the worst of times. And both encouraged Americans to see the past as prologue to what they hoped would be better times. But only one anniversary, the 1976 Bicentennial, actually helped Americans believe that they lived in, if not the best of times, at least a period of promise. That other anniversary, USA 250, well, it's staggering on even as we sit here tonight. We remember the Bicentennial boosted American spirits. That's one of the great takeaways from 76. If the present events are remembered at all, and I have some doubt that they will be remembered at all like the Bicentennial, they're going to linger only briefly. It's been a pastiche, a discordant pastiche, glitzy spectacles centered in Washington, D.C., foregrounding one person, the President of the United States, and starring him in a script that he basically developed to tell his story about America. USA 250, what's ongoing right now, is basically a product of and an accelerant of the toxic cultural politics that's divided this country so much. On the rare occasions that Americans have paused to note USA 250, they haven't learned much from the national celebrations. Watkins Museum distinguished. You guys have done your usual, just exemplary job helping people in Lawrence and Douglas County make sense of the past. But most of what the national events have presented about our history has been wrong or slanted. This example just would indicate, I think, why this celebration now in 2026 differs so much from 1976. It contrasts two statements made on the occasion of the bicentennial. Last week, the president said, "We continue to guard against efforts to obtain citizenship by malign foreign actors and other aliens ineligible for birthright citizenship." 50 years ago this month, Gerald Ford had something very different to say about immigration and the American story. He swore in hundreds of new citizens on July 4 and July 5 in two sacred American places, Fort McHenry and Monticello. And Gerald Ford said this, "I am very proud to welcome all of you as fellow citizens of the United States of America. I invite you to join fully in our American adventure and to share our common goal and our common glory. You have given us a birthday present beyond price, yourselves, your faith, your loyalty, and your love. We thank you with full and friendly hearts." Two utterly different presidential statements on the occasion of Americans' most important anniversary. Two very different Republican presidents governing what feels almost like two different countries. Presidential conduct is one reason why the 1976 bicentennial felt nothing like America's ongoing 250th anniversary. But irony alert here, although this huge difference separates 76 from 2026, both those milestone birthdays came during a period when the nation was uncertain, people were divided, we doubted our place in the world, and we doubted what debt we owed to our revolutionary ancestors. Like today in the mid-70s, a miasma of discouragement shrouded the American public. And very much like today, the 200th birthday found Americans asking, has our run of good fortune pretty much run out? So imagine our collective surprise when the bicentennial came. Amid real troubles and anxious worries, millions of Americans in tens of thousands of cities celebrated the American story. Proudly, creatively, in big cities like Philadelphia, which is obviously one of the great centers for the bicentennial, but right here on Mass Street too. This parade down Mass Street, the gentlemen in the tri-cornered hats, this was kind of characteristic of the way Americans in 76 took the bicentennial and made it a hometown story. Those good feelings are missing almost entirely today. Hey, raise your hand. Did you go to the cage fight? At $5,000 a ticket. I doubt many of you dug that deep. 349 million of your fellow Americans stayed away too, making the same choice. By contrast, in 1976, the National Bicentennial Parade in Washington drew over 900,000 people to the mall. They stayed to watch the fireworks, and then they created a 2-day traffic jam trying to get home again. But it was a very good-natured traffic jam, according to the Washington Post, which covered it like a sports event. Anybody plan to go to the Freedom 250 IndyCar race in 10 days? Yeah, probably not. Another $5,000 a pop. By contrast, the two big free 1976 events, the Great Tall Ships Parade that came up New York Harbor, and the Valley Forge reunion of the National Wagon Train at the end of the route, both drew over 1 million people to view that event. That's 1 million people gathered at Valley Forge in the smog and the rain to watch the wagon train come in. So one reason I think that happened is this guy here, John Warner. Some of you may remember, he went on from being the bicentennial director to become a United States Senator from Virginia. He served 3 terms in the Senate. Also well known for being one of Elizabeth Taylor's last husbands. He was married to Elizabeth Taylor, I think, for about 10 or 12 years. Anyway, with President Ford's approval and direction, Warner said, we have a job here, and that is to make sure that we have a hometown celebration, which is one reason why I'm going to illustrate that hometown celebration with 3 very different kinds of places. Right here in Douglas County, Philadelphia, and New Mexico, possibly one of the most distinctive and unusual states in the country. And you might not be surprised, their bicentennial events were equally distinctive and unique. What held these together is each of them was built almost entirely by local people, telling local stories. Hometown proof that the national motto, E pluribus unum, still mattered. It still mattered to folks in 1976. It's a little bit too late to change USA 250. We're 8 months into it. The anniversary should have been a big deal, but politics got in the way. We had three options at the start last year. We could have commemorated the 250th anniversary of the signing of the Declaration of Independence. Commemorate's kind of a nice neutral word, but it has a little bit of a heavy feel. We tend to commemorate things like Quantrill's raid, the 1981 collapse of the Hyatt Regency. It's got kind of a sad vibe to it. We could have celebrated 250. That kind of catches the yay, USA, we're #1 vibe. But celebration feels a little bit hollow because the American Revolution that exploded in 1776 changed that world, and it changes our world almost every single day. I think also a celebration put together by the same people who pulled off the cage fight, the IndyCar race, and are censoring museums for not telling positive history, has a little bit of an uncertain feel to it. So if we didn't want to commemorate, if we didn't want to celebrate, 250 could have been an occasion to reconsider, some thoughtful questions about how we got to where we are, a little bit of a careful look at the past, opening up some evidence that we hadn't thought about before. As a historian, that's like great. That's my wheelhouse. I love that. As you will see, USA 250 has been really short on careful reconsideration. Basically, what's happened here is Americans have largely ignored USA 250. Mostly it got mooshed into the July 4th celebration, the pretty typical barbecue at home, a couple beers with the family, some Whistling Pete's out on the street. But that's a shame because these big events only come every 50 years. We could have done better than that, and we did in 1976. We easily could have had the kind of celebration that would have worked. What got in the way was politics. It's no surprise that the country is pretty deeply divided. I think this editorial cartoon about fighting over the meaning of USA 250 kind of captures that. There are deep disagreements in the American public. A lot of us are really worried about our future. Hey, I am like the born optimist of all times, and I'm worried about the American future. So it's kind of hard to get people fired up about some big event to celebrate when there's that much concern. I was struck that the share of Americans who feel proud to be an American has dropped by 30% in the last 10 years. Barely half of Americans under 35, and I see several of you in this room, barely half of you think the American dream has any real meaning in your life. More than 75% of voters as of a month ago do not trust our federal government. 2/3 do not like where the country is headed. And that was a Fox News poll. Big majorities still agree on what makes America's rights important to them. Big majorities still agree that we are a valuable place to be. But when you ask the hard question about those rights, who should enjoy them? How equal should we be? That's where the partisan divisions start blowing up and the generational divides open. One pollster who looked at those numbers said, I'm a little concerned because I see one vision of the country and one mood among Republican crisis consumed the country, especially the federal government. All three branches basically were Watergate, Watergate, Watergate every single day, but the federal government still put together the administrative apparatus and developed some big strategic goals, including let's have hometown people say what they think America means to them. Today, another case study of why Washington is broken. I didn't know this until I started this research, but there's a legal and political difference between these two logos. Freedom 250 is different from America 250. Why is that? Well, America 250 started out as a law. 10 years ago, President Obama and the Congress passed a bipartisan law designating that as our official slogan and standing up this little agency to help planning it. Idea being that local folks would carry it forward. That plan got smashed to bits in December. Rule of law, anything that President Obama did, we're not interested in that. So the president decreed a new official anniversary symbol and slogan. He ordered federal agencies to replace America 250 with Freedom 250. He stood up a new Freedom 250 commission designed to kneecap the little America 250 agency and to take directions straight from the White House. No surprise, it is funded by private donors, many of them foreign. We don't know the depth or the concentration of those contributions, and it's basically changed the whole focus of the 250th celebration. So earlier I said, the choice, commemorate, celebrate, reconsider. The president had an answer, partay. We are going to partay this, and we're going to partay a product called America, and it's going to star me, the president. He's all over the USA 250 stuff. It's very Washington, D.C. centered. It's unrolled a little bit as partly a marketing script, partly a parable, and partly an invitation to a really hellish good birthday party celebrating a person, not a country. It was pretty nice of him to invite us to the party. He boasted back late 25, early 26, 2026 would be the most spectacular birthday the world had ever seen. And then he kicked it off with a multi-million-dollar military parade on his birthday, not on America's birthday. The USA 250 preaches a vision of America. It's basically a vision that is defiantly evangelical. It's sponsored its own prayer marathon on the National Mall. And the vision is goodness and heroism of a nation that was called by God to save the world. The president keynoted the prayer vigil at the National Mall. And then Freedom 250 sent out freedom trucks. If you go to Hutch for the Kansas State Fair, you may see one of the freedom trucks. There are about 3 dozen of them rolling around the country right now. You might think that freedom trucks to tell the story of the American Revolution would have relied on the historians at the Smithsonian or our National Museum of Independence in Philadelphia. No, they were not asked to participate. Instead, the freedom trucks were designed by an online educational program called Prager University and a Christian college called Hillsdale. They put it all together. They're rolling symbols of this celebration as a spectacle. It's a spectacle that submerges American heritage beneath the president's brand. He ordered up a $100 bill so that he can sign it. He wants a new $250 bill with his portrait on it so he can sign that too. The Mint just struck a $1 coin bearing his face. It's not gold, it's gilt, but no surprise with that. He put his picture in our passports, and he put himself alongside George Washington on our National Park Service pass. So to get in our national park with a pass, you buy this. Many of the large federal buildings in Washington have banners bearing the face of the president. I've worked over 3 different times in 3 different federal agencies in Washington, D.C. I have never, ever seen a banner of a sitting president hanging from one of your federal buildings in Washington, D.C. And then to sort of cap things off, as my late Missouri grandmother might have said, that don't beat all, the cage fight. At our White House on the South Lawn, the president held a cage fight again on his birthday, not on America's. And true to form, the fight ring, the arc or whatever it was called, the claw, has been replaced by a helipad paid for by a defense contractor that builds the helicopters that ferries the president around. And that defense contractor is now in the process of resodding the South Lawn with a gigantic concrete helipad. Last month, the president convened what he called a 50-state American fair and became another personal rally. This is how he announced that he would be the featured attraction. I'm the #1 attraction everywhere in the world. The man who gets bigger audiences than Elvis in his prime, the man who loves our country more than anyone else in history, and the man some say is the greatest president in history, the greatest of all time, the GOAT, Donald J. Trump. To round out this independent summer, in about 10 days, Indy cars will be rolling through the streets of Washington at 225 miles an hour. The president will start that by driving the presidential limousine at the head of the pack of cars as they start. The announcement of the race is funny. The announcement said, just as Washington and Jefferson marked notable American celebrations with horse races, The Freedom 250 race will bring that historic tradition into the 21st century, renewing our sense of patriotic pride. Very 1776, huh? Sounds just like that. Instead of building a grassroots 250th anniversary, we have become spectators at a spectacle designed and scripted out of the White House. In a way, it's cultured for an attention deficit community, and it's turned this spectacle into a presidentially directed, DC-centered, top-down event. There's no room for ideas about what independence or American history mean to ordinary American people. You're from Kansas, Pennsylvania, New Mexico, you're going to have ideas about America. You're going to say, I think America means this, or I think the ideals of freedom and equality mean that. There's no room for that kind of conversation. It's one reason why there are so few local 250th anniversary events compared to 1976. And we missed an opportunity, a huge opportunity. It didn't have to be this way, because it wasn't this way in 1976. We could have thought hard about what national unity means. I mean, we've come through what Lincoln called a lot of fiery trials in our history. Why? Why have we held together like that? We could have shared our American stories in all the different places that make us America. Instead, we pretty much abdicated that so one person can put on an America First stage play. At the end of this, as Will said, we're going to ask you for some 76 memories, because I'm thinking a lot of you guys do have 76 memories. I know I do. That's me in the summer of 76 with a couple of my bros from Boise, Idaho. I'm from Idaho originally. So no judging if you want to talk about what you were wearing in 1976.
I think you're wearing the same shirt.
My wife would agree. She said, that looks exactly like me. Anyway, we remember the mid-70s as kind of a nostalgic time, you know, disco, Star Wars, happy days. We built a bicentennial in the midst of some of the hardest years in modern American history. Just think about the years 63 to 75 that preceded the bicentennial. Somebody once told me, I think of them as the dreadful dozen of American history. We had one president gunned down in 63, his brother 5 years later. 6 weeks prior to that, the black man that many of us hoped could lead us toward the promised land was killed in Memphis. We were a divided, uncertain country. For 15 years, we struggled to explain why we were losing so many cans and so many young Americans in Vietnam. 60,000 dead, 3 times that many home again, broken in spirit, and every American saying, what were we there? What were we doing? At the same time, campuses like KU were filled with tear gas, with anger, with marches, with hope, with conflict. Then came Watergate. Gerald Ford called it our long national nightmare. It crash landed on top of all of this, and it hurt American confidence in a way that has not really ever recovered. If you look at surveys, before about 1974, most Americans most of the time thought we got most things right. Since the middle and late 1970s, most Americans are really skeptical that we can get things right, especially at the governmental level. So, 1974, the situation was politically torn. It was grim. There was an ugly tide of recrimination sweeping over our land. That's from Gerald Ford. I mean, that's how divided the country was. The next year, 1975, the president opens the bicentennial. Terrorists detonated 89 bombs all across America, and assassins twice tried to kill the president of the United States within 1 month. If you remember that, the month of September of 75, Gerald Ford escaped assassination twice in 4 weeks. To millions of Americans in the mid-70s, democracy smelled like kind of a losing thing. Regular people doubted we could ever be one nation indivisible. Even the National Bicentennial Agency said, you know, we started this off in the middle of the most bitter times in our brief history. But despite all of that, and maybe because of that, we made a bicentennial worth the revolution that it honored. It surprised us. We kind of followed Lincoln's admonition, bind up the nation's wounds. And we did. We started writing a new national narrative in all the different ordinary, interesting places that America takes shape. At the end of it, the Bicentennial Commission wrote their big annual wrap-up in late '76. John Warner said, with relief, "Oh, the Bicentennial became a hometown affair. It brought together dissidents as well as neighbors and friends for the common purpose, a celebration of, by, and for the people." And the celebrations were, this is Eudora. Eudora declared itself the first bicentennial community in Kansas, got their bicentennial flag to fly outside the church there. Parade in Lawrence, right down Mass Street. And Lawrence was one of the interesting, we were a neighbor, it actually went through Eudora. The National Wagon Train, one of the really hallmark things, brought wagons from all over the country. It came up the old Santa Fe Trail, went through Eudora, but deviated up to Lawrence. And the National Wagon Train went right down the main street, Massachusetts Street of Lawrence. Eudora got bigger, they got a bigger thing, all the wagons went through there. But that's the kind of stuff that was going on. In Philadelphia, not only did they develop this really cool logo, they got the Queen to come and rededicate the Liberty Bell. She had one thing. She went to Washington, D.C. to have dinner with the president. She said, "I want to go to Philadelphia." That's where it all started. So she rededicated the Liberty Bell and told a story about how the same foundry that cast it is still casting bells for England today. Then there's New Mexico, certainly one of the most distinctive bicentennial places. You can see there's no marching men in tri-cornered hats. Instead, it's the Zia symbol, the nuclear symbol because of the nuclear research up there, and a cultural mosaic because New Mexico is culturally, in some ways, the most distinctive, unusual of the American states. It also was the starting point for one of the big national wagon train jump-offs. That's the famed Plaza of New Mexico. The wagon train headed north, following the Santa Fe Trail, and, oops, oh, good stuff.
Oh, there it
Oh,
goes.
there we go. Okay. Anyway, I'll go back to one of them. Yeah, one other interesting thing New Mexico did is commemorate something that none of you, I'll bet, have ever heard of, the Dominguez Escalante Expedition of 1776. New Mexico was not even part of the United States of America. It wasn't even part of the British Empire. It's part of the Spanish Empire. And there was this amazing horse expedition that went all the way from Santa Fe, trying to reach what became San Francisco. Didn't make it because of weather issues. But they had a group of riders launch from the plaza and recreate that route, hundreds of horseback riders. That was how they were going to celebrate their part in the American story, by telling something that had nothing to do with the United States of America or the revolution against Britain. I've concluded, partly because I'm interested in politics, that leadership really mattered in making the bicentennial. I think Gerald Ford's vision and calmness and leadership made a difference. Obviously, millions of Americans took the laboring oar in building all these, but he was the president who had the judgment and the wisdom to say, I don't need to be the center of this. I do not need to be the star of the bicentennial. And remember, he had been in office barely a year. He was unelected. Most people had some major doubts about whether he could carry the responsibility of the president. But he had the confidence in Americans to say, it's your bicentennial, it's your country, you guys take the lead on this. On two of the most signal days, though, he really did step up, July 4 and July 5. And what he chose to do was to swear in immigrants and give those words that I started with, those really passionate words about how America is a land of immigrants. And those immigrant stories are what make us distinctive and make us unique. That big national parade I talked about in DC, the theme was America, a nation of nations. I love the fact they chose Johnny Cash and Nelson Rockefeller as the grand marshals. There's this great picture of the two of them standing looking at each other on a limousine going, how did you end up here? But they hit it off great. There were bands and marchers and floats from Scots communities, Irish, Czech, Slovaks, Dutch, Germans, Koreans, Chinese, Greeks, Italians, Filipinos, and Serbs. New Mexico sent a delegation of Navajo code talkers. Now, Gerald Ford believed to his core that immigration was good for America. But there was also another reason going on. Remember, 1976 wasn't just the bicentennial year. Any politically inclined people? It's a presidential election year. Remember, Gerald Ford had not been elected president. He had to earn that job. And I think one reason why he liked foregrounding the immigrant story is the swing states of those days, which were often the upper Midwest and the industrial East, were filled with the children and grandchildren of the great second wave of immigration. And so there was a reason for him and Ronald Reagan to try to compete with those votes. Reagan himself spoke warmly about immigration in the bicentennial summer. And in his last statement as president, he talked about immigration being one of the things that made America different, unique, and good. So I think Gerald Ford had a lot to do with setting the tone and setting the pace for the bicentennial that we celebrated. One thing that struck me about looking at the 76th bicentennial compared to now is that we have had some really good studies of the American Revolution and its impact on the world. Ken Burns this winter, if you guys saw any of the PBS special that Burns did, well worth a view. That's the kind of thoughtful reconsideration of what revolution means, what the struggle for equality means. What does it mean to declare independence from a colonial empire and then do so violently? I mean, he reminded us that the American Revolution wasn't just a bunch of, bewigged men in short pants saying, thank you, we think we would like to exit this. It was violent, it was bloody, the exclusion of the loyalists who chose not to stay here. More of them were killed and driven out of America than French opponents of the French Revolution. We forget that it was a violent, controversial, bloody struggle that lasted a decade before it was over. I think Burns and other good historians like the work you guys are doing in Watkins remind us that disagreements about American history are the stuff of American history. Those are the conversations that we should have. What does it mean to be American? What does it mean to be American? What does it mean to be free and independent? What does it mean to be equal? These really powerful ideas that blasted the country in 1776 and still kind of drive us today. These conversations about power and privilege, about equality and freedom, these are the conversations that these folks who served our country and defended our country in small cemeteries in Mexico and in cemeteries throughout the country, that's what they were defending, the right to have those conversations and disagreements. The 76th bicentennial, in some ways, to me, symbolized the fact that if you ask ordinary Americans to take ownership and responsibility, they will grab that and tell a really powerful story. It may not be the story that the power folks want to hear in DC, but it is still a really important story to tell. And that was where Gerald Ford made a big strategic decision to take it out of DC and to tell John Warner, this is the people's bicentennial. Let them define it. Let them build it. Let them carry it off. Those lessons, unfortunately, have not been learned for the USA 250 that is ongoing right now. It's one reason why it has none of the vibe of the 76th bicentennial, and unfortunately, I suspect it will have none of the impact that the bicentennial had of bringing Americans out of this period of confusion, uncertainty, and division, and reminding them, hey, this is actually quite an interesting country. If you make it an interesting country, it could be a really amazing place, because that's what folks concluded looking back at the bicentennial. It drew the country together, and it replaced the division and the anger and the confusion with a sense of purpose that Americans felt like they had lost. Current one, to be determined, but I have my doubts about it based on what I shared earlier. With that, I think Will and Steve and I want to gather some of your bicentennial thoughts. The whole point of the 76 series here is to let folks in this community talk a little bit about what some of these big ideas about freedom and independence mean, and to share some of your own experiences from I shared my experience. I actually had kind of a funny thing in 76. I was working for one of Idaho's U.S. senators there. I can't believe he hired me with my hair looking like that. It was a different time and place. He also was running for president on the Democratic side. He didn't get anywhere near it. But we went to a lot of community bicentennial events up and down this big, complicated state of Idaho. And it was fascinating to see how different the state was, because I was a kid from Boise. I'd never been to the Panhandle. I'd really never been to the far eastern part of the state. But what united all of these was, hey, we're proud to be Idahoans, and we're really proud to be Americans. Let's show that in a really distinctive way. And it's real different in North Idaho from Eastern Idaho. So that's my bicentennial memory. Thanks, folks online, for sticking with us. And Will and Steve, do you guys want to solicit some ideas and
Sure.
recollections?
Well, first, let's give Dr. Brooks a round of applause. Do we have anyone who is brave enough to step up and share their memories, or do we want to sort of just?
We want to stay out.
Oh, you want to stay out there? Okay. So maybe also the people at home have somebody to look at. Do you mind standing there, Carl?
I'll
Or
stand right here.
okay, maybe move your mouth as our people are speaking. No.
I can hold up the microphone.
Yeah, and if anyone has questions about Carl's presentation as well, go ahead.
Yeah, we can go back and forth, questions, recollections, yeah. John Nalbandian, one of my KU colleagues.
Carl, hearing you talk, sort of reflecting on my own family and my own family's history. My wife was Japanese. She was born in an internment camp in World War II in Arizona.
Mhm.
My mother came here from Istanbul as an immigrant. I just think of where I am today in such, on all that I have received. And I think it's because we live in America.
In some ways, that was one of Ronald Reagan's best moments. I'm not a huge Reagan fan, but I think he said it best when he said, in no place else in the world have people come from so many different places to try to make a new country. And he said, that's what makes us unique and distinctive and strong. He also signed the Reparations Act in 1983 that acknowledged the United States' criminal error in imprisoning 400,000 honest, loyal, hardworking people of Japanese American descent. So he had the guts to do that too. So good on him for that. Thanks, John. Yeah, Will.
Carl, I had a different perspective on Gerald Ford because I learned about him in school and things like that, and a lot of pop culture presentations, and it's usually treats him like maybe a little negatively, exactly. But it sounds like he really stepped up to the plate for the Bicentennial, and I'm wondering if there were he chose to focus on celebrating immigrants and welcoming them to America, and was there a lot of anti-immigration sentiment in 1976? I really don't know anything about that.
There was not. I was struck looking back at that. I mean, I'm not an immigration historian, but I was struck by the fact that it was not unusual for political leaders to congratulate immigrant communities in their neighborhood, to praise their contributions, to welcome them to this country. Demographically, it was one of the real low points of immigration. It wasn't the numerical swell that it's been the last 10 or 12 years, but it was not. Anti-immigrant then was wrapped up with Ku Klux Klanism, racism. It was considered a really poor behavior. You didn't talk that way about immigrants because so many people had immigrant parents just 1 or 2 generations ago. It was much closer experience to people's lives.
Excellent.
Yes, please.
So I was 13 during the Bicentennial, and there were 3 television networks. And for 100 days, 200 days, maybe a year's worth, there were the Bicentennial minutes.
Yes.
And every network would show it at the same time. So everyone would watch it, and they would get big celebrities to. And so I learned so much cool stuff about American history stuff.
Yep.
And I was trying to remember who got to do the very last one. Maybe Betty Ford did the very last one. But it was a big deal.
Yeah.
Those, and it was so great to find a DVD of all of those.
Oh, it would.
But the idea that all 3 networks would show it,
Right.
and it also shows and it didn't occur to me as a kid that what the messages we were hearing in each of the minutes, that there was possibly any politics in those.
Right.
Now, there would have been some somewhere.
Oh, sure. I'm sure the historians who worked up those scripts had some conversations about what point to make about a certain issue. But...
And I remember even in 76, there was an attempt to emphasize the fact that it wasn't just white men that were involved in the Revolutionary War. They would emphasize women, of course, emphasize people of color, and all of that.
That was one of the interesting points about researching the New Mexico angle. Again, remember, it wasn't even part of the British Empire, But the New Mexico events throughout 1975 and 76 really took seriously the idea that New Mexico is ethnically, linguistically, the most complicated American state. And that whole complexity was at the heart of their bicentennial events. They took it on real seriously. And there were some big debates among New Mexicans about what it meant to be an American, who got to tell the American story. But it was like, hey, that's why we're here. Let's have this debate. Yes, I'll go. Yes, then you, then you.
And then we have a question online too.
Oh, yes, okay, and then we'll go online, please.
There were a couple of things, and I think of Gerald Ford, the first thing I think of is that he led the impeachment process against William O. Douglas.
Ah, yes.
And the other thing is that the person who brought my last name to the United States, my great-great-great-great-grandfather, was a Haitian mercenary who fought against the Americans and walked away when the French beat them.
Started off as an effort to crush America and ended up becoming American.
Wow. A lot of Haitian mercenaries, they were indentured servants.
Well, yeah, right. Soldiers of fortune. Yes, sir.
Your wonderful talk has engendered in me a great pride in 1976 because I was a delegate to the Republican convention in 1976 in Kansas City. In those years, a moderate Republican was a word people understood. Today, I think it's oxymoronic. Anyway, it was a great pride that I organized the old 5th Congressional District of Kansas for Gerald Ford, and then was elected as delegate to elect him over a strong efforts by Ronald Reagan.
Yes.
Prevailed later. And of course, Gerald Ford had the great wisdom to pick Bob Dole as his running mate.
Cementing forever Kansas loyalty in the memory of Gerald.
And of course, he colored himself by Harvey-Nixon, which was suicidal. I think he would have been elected otherwise.
Mm-hmm.
But it causes me to think today, whoever succeeds the current president, hopefully someday that may happen, if he were to pardon, if he were not to pardon the current president, a great uproar would occur.
Mm-hmm.
So that point will be raised again at some point.
Yes, I
And I ponder on what that might mean for this country.
Right.
But thank you so much for regenerating all my old memories of 1776.
Thanks for sharing the Kansas City Convention. By the way, I'll share this with Will and Steve, and there are 2 wonderful books about the 1976 presidential campaign. One by a guy named Rick Perlstein, and another one by Richard Norton Smith, who was a KU faculty member for a while. Both of them take Gerald Ford very seriously in a way that Chevy Chase never did. I mean, they consider him a consequential guy who had an amazingly difficult job. Sure, he didn't do everything right, but he deserves more respect than our memories of Saturday Night Live leave with us. Yeah, let's see. Oh, yes, sir.
So I just wanted to share an anecdote just to demonstrate, kind of pick up on your talk about the enthusiasm of 1976. So I was 15 years old. I was living in Ridgewood, New Jersey, which is a classic New England town, not far outside of New York City. And I ran with a group of guys, generally up to no good, and had even bigger hair than you had. Right on. And I don't remember how, but we found ourselves in the mayor's office volunteering to paint all the downtown fire hydrants red, white, and blue. I honestly don't remember why or how. Looking back on it now, I don't know. I mean, my kids would never do it. So, but we were just caught up, right? We were just caught up in the enthusiasm of the bicentennial.
Kudos to the mayor for recognizing your patriotic spirit and putting a paintbrush on your hand.
I lived in a community with red, white, and blue fire hydrants as well.
Please.
Yeah, I was 15 in 76, and my parents ran a small town drive-in restaurant. And all of the drink cups and almost all of the tableware had Bicentennial themes. It was everywhere. And we handled that all year long. And we were so grateful when 77 got there. Finally able to change. I mean, because there was no options. It's just what the vendors sold. Everything was Bicentennial.
You might remember the 7-Up. If you got 7-Up cans, they had a puzzle piece on the back of them, and I think you would pile them up and they would form an Uncle Sam. I remember the summer I hung out with a group of people and we would all try to guess all the 7-Up cans.
So here's some Bicentennial marketing that really made me laugh. The director of the New Mexico History Museum had me give a version of this talk. Her brother was born in Pueblo, Colorado, summer of '76, and he was declared the bicentennial baby of the county of Pueblo. And the hospital gave the birth certificate with red, white, and blue around it. And he still keeps this as the bicentennial baby of Pueblo. Yeah, Steve.
I think there's a.
Oh, yes,
question.
please.
Although I do want to make an observation, but go ahead.
Yeah. All right. So, Karl, keeping in mind that you're speaking only for yourself, viewer online asks, can you say more about how you feel the founding fathers would view America 250 and the Trump administration in general? So feel free to say whatever you would like as yourself.
Yeah, no easy job on that. Okay, so I'll take the classic professional historian response, which is, I cannot begin to comprehend and to express an opinion that a James Madison or Thomas Jefferson might have had. I think we can learn by reading what they wrote about power and responsibility and the rule of law, something that would guide us during these times. I mean, they don't have any magic cookbook answers, but I think they wrestled with some of the same questions we wrestle with today. What's the role of power? What's the role of temptation for those who hold power? What's the role of a citizen? What's the role of an educated citizenry? I'm a big James Madison fan. He was a big believer in educated citizens being really the primary support of a republic that would work, a self-governing republic. So it's a little bit difficult to say, except there is wisdom in what the founders and framers had to say. And they might also say, we grew up at a time when questions about power and tyranny were very familiar to us. So.
Yeah. We have a comment from Anna Schaus, who's a volunteer at the Watkins Museum. A story, she says, President Ford's daughter, Susan, was a KU student in the mid-1970s. Her Secret Service agent would attend classes with her. I was an AI at the time. One of my, obviously a different meaning for AI, than we're used to today. One of my fellow AIs had her in his class.
Oh my gosh. She was a photographer for the Topeka newspaper.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, I had me not being a native Kansan, I did not know that. Wow, so she's a Jayhawk.
Yeah.
Cool.
Well, I want to share that, like a good museum program should, you've made me kind of put some of my memories in a new light. I was 12 during the Bicentennial. This didn't strike me until just now, but it must have felt like we could all be a part of that celebration, because I wrote a letter to President Ford and drew a picture of the White House and sent that to him. And I'm sure somewhere I have that Ford letter that comes back, thanks so much Ford. Yeah, but that it would possess a 12-year-old to, write to the president.
Kind of along those lines, that National Wagon Train was a really complicated venture to put together. Try to imagine something like 650 horse-drawn wagons from every state in the country ending up in Valley Forge. Along with that was something called I think it was called the Bicentennial Roll, and 950,000 people of all ages, when the wagon train would go through, they would line up for hours waiting to sign that scroll to sort of testify that I was part of this in some small way. That's the kind of stuff that was so characteristic of the '76 events. Yes?
I want to, having listened to the rest of you, I want to quickly add that I was not a teenager. In fact, some of my friends think I was part of the 17th century. But anyway, my wife, Alexandra, and I were talking the other wasn't it there that at noon on the 4th of July, nations, cities, towns, communities all across America rang the church bells and all the bells
And
in
we had little
town
bells that we
Yeah.
at noon on their time zone,
Right.
which we remembered.
I did encounter that, and that was not directed by Washington DC. That was an organic celebration that faith communities all over America kind of got together in a pre-internet age. You know, probably a lot of mimeograph letters went out to pastors and faith leaders to pull that together. Imagine that, something like 75 or 80,000 faith communities rang their bells at the very same time all across the country. Yes, sir.
Yes, I might comment on something. It goes back to when you talked about the community, and as I remember from that year, the Chamber of Commerce wanted everybody to put bunting up, and so they were all given bunting, and my bunting goes up every year since then. And it's kind of hard to remember, but anyway, we've been doing bunting, we've had to put it all together, and the same product is on my house every year.
Very good, yeah, a lasting legacy. Bonnie.
Yeah, so two things. One, a couple of months ago, I went home to see family in Oklahoma, and my aunt was wearing this blinged out Route 66 jacket. And I was like, what's, nice jacket. And she said, it's the 100th anniversary, of course. What are you doing to celebrate? I was like, I was not aware. So it's a big deal
Huge
to a
deal.
lot of people in Oklahoma. And then I was 9 in 1976, and our whole class from school took the day off and took the school bus to Oklahoma City to stand in line and to see the Freedom Train.
Ah, yes, right.
And I remember seeing Dorothy's ruby red slippers and all the stuff from the Smithsonian that came on the train, and you had like a little conveyor belt or whatever that you took through the train.
Yep.
And that was just such a highlight.
If I recollect, somebody who was native to Lawrence, I think the Freedom Train came through Kansas City, Missouri, Kansas City, Kansas, and then headed west along the main UP line. Anybody
Well,
see
you
it?
go through Topeka somehow.
Topeka, yeah, okay, yeah. No, that was a bit, lots of recollections in the years after, said the Freedom Train was one of the things that ordinary people remembered, because it was like objects. They could look at.
I would read Superman and Batman comics at that time, and they would have stories about, protecting the Constitution and the Declaration on the Freedom Train from the Joker or whatever.
Anybody else want to, yes, sir?
I'm from Philadelphia. And we lived through it. I was in my late 20s, and to the tenure and the relationship between the federal and the state. When they first brought the idea of the exhibits, they were presenting documents that were stagnant and historical. And the feedback from the community is these issues are alive today. So all the exhibits became the document and how they affected the issues of today. And one piece that was done beautifully. Can you imagine, have you seen the pictures of the historical area? The City Hall, Independence Center, some of the cobblestone streets, Carpenter Hall. They had one exhibit that happened in front of Carpenter's Hall, where people were gathered. Jefferson, I think, came out of Carpenter's Hall dressed in full regalia and started talking with one of his speeches. And there were several other buildings all along the cobblestone streets. Benjamin Franklin comes out one door. Another person comes out another door, and they go into a debate. And it wasn't just with the costumes people. They would turn to people in the audience and say, what do you think? And they literally would get people to talk about it.
In Philadelphia,
That
people
was
express their opinion. I think of Philly people as
It was
pretty
a lot of
outspoken.
encouragement. And as far as immigration, I grew up in Philadelphia in the 40s and 50s, where
there were 3 and 4 generations of French communities, German, Chinese, Korean, where you go there and you were in a different world. It was the language, it was the food, and everybody get along.
Yeah. I'll share a third-hand memory. When I gave a version of this talk in New Mexico, a guy came up and he said, so I'm originally from New York City, and I was 14 years old when the tall ships came in, and here's what I remember. The mobster down the street opened his compound, which never was done because he had oceanfront property, and everybody in the neighborhood got to go through the mobster's front gate and sit on the yard and watch the tall ships. God, that is such like a New York memory. Yeah, he said it was the best view of Lower New York Harbor was from the mobster's green grass lawn.
Well, that's one version of the American dream.
Exactly, and realized by an immigrant.
Absolutely, yeah.
Anybody else want to chime in? Yes.
Well, my mother was 10 years old in 76, so I don't have anything about that. But I know when we talk about 1776, we talk a lot about the American experiment a lot, and I know that's something that's been brought back up in conversation today. Was that anything at all in the 70s? I don't know if you can answer.
Absolutely, yes. In fact, a lot of communities did events similar to what the gentleman from Philly talked about. They had big debates and conversations about what does the American experiment mean to us here today? Is there still vitality in the ideas of the American Revolution? And as you might expect, in some communities, it led to shouting and disagreement and really strong opinions being expressed. When the National Wagon Train went through northern New Mexico, much of northern New Mexico is tribal country. And a lot of the tribes in northern New Mexico were not interested in participating in it. So the wagon train comes to a stop in a little community called Las Vegas, New Mexico, not the strip Las Vegas, a little ranching town in northern New Mexico. And a group of Native and Chicano protesters surrounded the wagons and began to chant. This is 1976, after all. The Chicano power movement was super popular then. And the leader of the wagon train, a conservative Republican from Southern California, said, I want to hear these folks. They have something to say. That's why we're here, is to stimulate these kind of conversations about America. Let them talk. And they didn't agree on very much, but that was the way that the wagon train dealt with the kind of controversy that Americans, I mean, you ask Americans what they think and they'll tell you. And not everybody in northern New Mexico appreciated the symbolism of the wagon train. Yeah.
One last picture.
Yes.
Picture Independence Hall, big grassy lawns. Once a year, you'll see a big bonfire roaring. It's based on a treaty between William Penn and the indigenous community. It's a religious ceremony, but to this day it's respected.
By the way,
things still happen.
The Bicentennial is now enough in the past where there's some good histories of the Bicentennial itself. There's one that really focuses on Philadelphia by a historian named Mark, M-A-R-C, Stein, S-T-E-I-N. So if you want to find out how the cradle of independence celebrated the Bicentennial, this book that just came out last year is really interesting. Very down and gritty Philly politics involved in it. Well, Will and Steve, I guess with that, it's 8 o'clock. Thanks so much.